Venezuela, as you know, is this enormous country. Triple canopy jungle and mountains. If we go into this place militarily, we'll launch all sorts of airstrikes. We'll do a lot of damage. Will we lose any aircraft? I suppose it's possible. And then we'll try to send somebody in on the ground. And the question is, all right, to do what? Coups over the last, 20 plus years have not gone well. Frankly, the CIA hasn't been very successful at that kind of thing. Now, if that were to happen, then all those 15, 16, 17,000 army troops sitting up in Puerto Rico ready to come down to Venezuela are going to go in as a stabilization force. Well, good luck with that. 15,000 to do what? Stabilize Caracas? And then you have Colombia and Brazil. They have 150,000 paramilitaries that are just itching to come into Venezuela and support Venezuela against us. I don't see any upside.
Welcome back to Legitimate Targets, everybody. I hope you're all having a great day. I have got a treat for you on tonight's episode. I have the one, the only Colonel Douglas Macgregor. You probably know him from many of the online shows and TV shows that he frequents. Though with Tucker gone, I guess not as many TV shows. But the views are online now, as this show is proof of. And while Colonel Macgregor, his record precedes him, he is a retired U.S. Army colonel, decorated Gulf War combat veteran. He is a former senior advisor to the Pentagon, Secretary of Defense. And, I made the strong case for you, Colonel, to on my own channels, of course, to put you in the seat of command in that department, now Department of War, and this administration. And I think it would have gone a lot better. But we are where we are. Colonel's also an author, several books, Margin of Victory I have with me over here. And great read. I think everyone should read his works and could learn a lot and hopefully change things for the better. So, Colonel, thank you so much. How are you doing today?
Good. And thank you for the kind words. It's good to be here. The good news is that sometimes you go through the wrong people until you find the right ones. And I think that's well underway under the Trump administration.
So I got to get your thoughts to start off with yesterday, the Tucker episode on Judge Napolitano, where he said that someone had told him that maybe a Congress member had told him that maybe there would be an announcement about war in Venezuela. He wasn't sure. He said that. He said, I don't know what's going to happen. But what do you make of that? Do you think that was a purposeful leak of information and to get the eyes on Trump? And do you think a war is coming in Venezuela?
Well, I think highly of Tucker, and Tucker is not likely to say something that he's not certain is accurate. So whoever told him was probably telling him what he thought was the truth. What we don't know, and I've asked several people because none of us really knows at this point, what transpired between the time that that remark was made and President Trump decided to go on air and give what it sounded a lot like another rendition of his, State of the Union address, almost a campaign talk. I know his poll ratings are in the mid-30s, 33 to 36, not very good. And who knows, maybe he decided to wait and see what happened on the Hill, because the Hill is now considering something akin to the War Powers Act, and that's being led by Thomas Massie in the House. If it passes in the House, and then it'll move to the Senate, and perhaps he wants to wait and see what comes out of that. Now, the interesting part is he can veto it and still launch an attack on Venezuela, technically, if he wants to. And I would not rule that out at this point. I think he has unfortunately talked himself into a corner, Jackson. I mean, you can't threaten a country with all sorts of terrible things. You can't amass the kind of military power that's down there and then suddenly say, oops, I've changed my mind. Now, there's nothing to stop him from that. I would welcome that, frankly. I think he ought to take whatever deal that was offered, since he said that Maduro had offered him virtually everything he wanted. And then he said, I rejected it. So why not go back and take it? I don't know. But there are all sorts of things at work. And remember, everything in Washington is mortgaged to vanity. And so is this event in Venezuela now, I'm afraid.
What line would you draw between gunboat diplomacy and what is clearly going to be, a preparation for war? Do you look at the food contracts that are being signed off on for soldiers stationed in this region in the Caribbean in different bases going up until 2028. Do you look at the denial, as you mentioned, that Trump had made to Maduro about these deals? What is the red line here?
Well, I don't know. To be frank with you, I don't. I think the whole business is frankly ill-advised and ridiculous. I would not do what he's doing. I don't think this is a useful employment of American military power. I don't see that we stand to gain anything strategically from interfering inside Venezuela. Venezuela, as you know, is this enormous country. It's the size of Germany, France, and Austria combined, a population between 28.5 and 30 million, depending upon what data you want to look at. Triple canopy jungle and mountains. Yes, it's got lots of oil. The oil is heavy. And that is, it has a high sulfur content, so it requires substantial refining. That's something, incidentally, we do very well. We have the refineries right now on the Gulf Coast that could refine all of that oil easily. I don't think that you have to go to war to get the oil out. If what you want to do is reconstitute relations with Venezuela that we did have a few years ago, and get ExxonMobil in there, which is still is the biggest and, in my judgment, the best firm of its kind in the world, I still think that can be done. And that can actually be structured in a way that is beneficial to Venezuela. Our oil engineers are superb. When it comes to deep drilling, which is what you're talking about in Lake Maracaibo and elsewhere, they do it better than anybody else. So I would rather see that approach taken. But I think he wants to link this to an effort to expel Chinese and Russian investment and influence from the entire Western Hemisphere. It's a little late. And I'm not sure military power is the way to do it. And we do need to compete, especially with China. There's no doubt about that. So I would prefer to look at how do we change the way we do business with China. We want access to their markets. They no longer really need access to our technology. That's fine. Then what do we need to do differently to be more competitive? That's where I would put my emphasis at this stage. And the other reason is very simple. If we go into this place militarily, if you look at the way we do business, Jackson, we'll launch all sorts of airstrikes. We'll do a lot of damage. Will we lose any aircraft? I suppose it's possible. Probably not likely, but it's possible. And then we'll try to send somebody in on the ground. And the question is, all right, to do what? Mm-hmm. Now, some people are telling me, well, Doug, you don't understand. There's going to be a coup. And the coup in Caracas will remove Maduro, and they'll bring in this Mrs. Machado, install her as the new Western puppet for the United States and Israel, I guess. I don't know. That's a slim reed from which to suspend all of your hopes and aspirations in Venezuela. Coups over the last, 20 plus years have not gone well. They're very difficult to orchestrate. You're depending on a combination of CIA mercenaries and agents. And frankly, the CIA hasn't been very successful at that kind of thing. Now, if that were to happen, then all those 15, 16, 17,000 army troops sitting up in Puerto Rico ready to come down to Venezuela are going to go in as a stabilization force. Well, good luck with that. 15,000 to do what? Stabilize Caracas? And then you have Colombia and Brazil. They have 100, 150,000 paramilitaries that are just itching to come into Venezuela and support Venezuela against us. I don't see any upside. I don't see any big payoff. So who knows? Maybe rationality will suddenly take hold in Washington and we'll get out of this. But we know that Secretary of State Rubio, who has enormous backing from donors, and they're not all Zionists, various donors with different agendas, wants to do this. And it may be that Trump is under enormous pressure to cave and go ahead and do it. I don't know. I don't think it's the sort of thing President Trump ought to do. I wish he had advisors that said, boss, this is the wrong time, wrong place. We don't control the environment. There are too many variables. Let's forget this and move on. That would be ideal. We'll see what happens.
Well, you're the third person I've now heard or spoken to who's brought up the issue, the real issue for the U.S. of, in particular, Chinese exports, petro yuan exports, and what that could mean for the petrodollar in the future, I guess, if China were to take hold and start doing ample extraction and exporting with the Venezuelans for a global oil supply and the dollar at large. But you think there's a way? I mean, Maduro, I guess, has said that he wants more business from the U.S. He's open to it. He said Chevron should sign a 100-year deal, he hoped. You think that can be achieved through other means than war?
I think it could be, yes. And we have to resign ourselves to the fact that having shot ourselves in the foot economically, as well as politically and militarily over the last 30 years, we're not going to bounce back quickly. This is the big problem with Donald Trump and everything he talks about. He says, I'm reshoring manufacturing. Really? That's going to take a decade plus. I'm driving down prices on everything. Really? Just drive around the neighborhood and ask people how things are going. I mean, he can say these things, and perhaps that makes people feel good for a short time. Some people, maybe it makes him feel good. It's not an answer. We are behind in a number of critical areas. Let's face it. I'm talking about in economics. But we have enormous power and influence, certainly potentially, but also awaiting use. What am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about we let high-end manufacturing get away from us. 30 years ago, we built the chips. 30 years ago, we manufactured them. 30 years ago, we were ahead. Well, we lost that. Well, is that impossible to regain? Maybe not, but there are various areas in high-end manufacturing where we need to invest. We need to work that very hard. Secondly, agriculture. We're not extracting as much as we can get out of the agrarian sector. We used to feed the whole world. We're not doing that at this point. A lot of bad decisions have been made in agriculture. Then there is energy. We talk about energy all the time. Well, we've got to get involved with energy and figure out where we're going to put our emphasis. And that is not just in oil and gas. It's a whole range of different areas. And I'm not talking about this silly green nonsense that will leave us all in the dark for the next 20 years. I'm talking about real excursions into cold fusion and a lot of other things that we have not been working hard enough for. Thorium reactors, where the Chinese have now picked up. Then there's the whole electrical grid. Remember when Obama said, I want shovel-ready projects and I'm going to build infrastructure, and all that money vanished. Where did it go? Went into the pockets of all sorts of people that shouldn't have had it. What do we do about the electrical grid? Nothing. Yet people went in there, and I was there at the time. I was working as a consultant over in the Department of Defense, and I was working for the Department of the Navy. We all said, you've got to deal with the electrical grid. This thing is antiquated. Let's be frank. Very, very vulnerable. We had all these exercises. We knew where all the nodes were and how vulnerable we were. Nobody would touch it. So where did it all go? Well, went into the wrong pockets. Two things are happening right now. First of all, I think in terms of understanding the world and leading, we are reaching entropy. The administration, after a year, is reaching entropy. All the energy is going out of it. It's like a balloon that, you stuck with a pin and it's going down. Now, is there any good news? Well, I'll give you one piece of good news. This man, Bailey, who is being named as the likely successor to Bongino, is a brilliant attorney, a very highly intelligent man, knows what he's doing. If they put him into the FBI, I'd prefer to see him in charge of the FBI. That's going to be a game changer. In other words, personnel is policy. Personnel is everything. Human capital is everything. President Trump has put a lot of people in there who have no business being there. They don't know what they're doing, and there's no direction. The second thing is Congress. Congress exists to do one thing, Jackson: spend money. If you go up there and take them aside, senators go say, look, that's what we do here. We spend money. Now, what do you want us to do? Well, I don't want you to spend money. What? No, that's impossible. First of all, if I don't spend money, I don't get any donations. I can't stay in office. I can't redistribute to my constituents either. I got to spend. No, you don't. Right now, we don't want to spend. And if we're going to spend, we need a strategy that makes sense, that's targeted. Well, that's not going to help the folks that I represent in Louisiana. That's not going to help the folks I represent in California. Well, there's some bad news. There's this thing, it's called the United States of America. It's a nation. It has to take priority. So while that may not necessarily make the people in Louisiana or California happy right now, the long run, it'll be better. But in the meantime, we have to target the following areas that may not be the areas that you think are important. That's where we have to go. But that takes real leadership at the top. And it takes power at the top-down power to make these things happen. President Trump has been there for a year, and he squandered a lot of that capital that he had when he was elected. He could have charted new directions. This morning, a friend of mine who watches Asia very carefully sent me 2 articles. One was about Congress, which is sending more than $10 billion to Taiwan for armament. Yep. Another one who says, well, we're going to double down and reinforce on the forces that we have on the Korean Peninsula. Insane. We need to get out of Korea. We should have been out of there a long time ago. President Trump knows that. He knew that back in 2020. So we need to get out, not double down and make it worse. The people there would like us to leave. By the way, the Japanese would like us to leave. But they're too polite to tell us to get out. Now, at some point, that will happen. And that's the wrong way to leave. But right now, we need to demilitarize our relations with Asia. And we're militarizing them. We're provoking and we're irritating the Chinese. It doesn't make any difference for us. We don't need to do that. China is not this mega military power armed to the teeth with armies gathered on the borders to Southeast Asia or on the borders of Manchuria, ready to march into Korea and march into Vietnam. So get that out of your mind. That's not what they're interested in. Chinese are about business. Mm-hmm. Anybody who's been to Asia has figured that out. That's what they're about. And in the world today, we need to be more about business. And we're not. Remember Calvin Coolidge? Calvin Coolidge was a guy who looked like he'd been weaned on a pickle. Had this, he was a very uninteresting guy. But one of the things that Calvin Coolidge said that everybody should remember, the business of America is business. We've forgotten that. So we're leading with the armed forces. What's that evidence for? It's evidence for weakness. Mm-hmm. When the only thing you've got left is a club to beat someone over the head into submission, you've probably lost. And that's our problem now. So we're headed down the wrong track. And the armed forces, I'm so tired of this. We have the greatest armed forces in the world. Listen, I was in the armed forces, and I think the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines are great people. But this thing is a relic. It's a relic of the Cold War. We're wasting money on a lot of it. We need fundamental change and need to go into new directions. There's no imminent danger. The Russians certainly don't want to destroy us. They don't want to nuke us. I mean, have you seen any evidence of that on the streets of Moscow? Oh, yeah, let's march into Washington. It's absurd. No, of course not. So we need to get rid of all these dumb ideas, but these dumb ideas are really institutionalized. And the donors who own all of the so-called think tanks, which is an oxymoron anyway, they're pushing all the bad policies. And everybody says, well, why should we change? And the reason, what they're really telling you is this is where the money comes from. And remember, Trump, in the first term, people disliked him intensely, but everybody knew why, because he threatened to disrupt the money flow. Yep. This time he came back and he doubled down on it. Now, all of this at a point in time where our economic condition, our financial system is extremely fragile. You know that. I mean, people say, well, what do you think? I said, look, Peter Schiff, Alistair McLeod, Luke Groman, come on, Mohammed El-Arian, Nassim Taleb, listen to those people. They're telling you the truth. I am not a financial expert, but I'm not stupid. I can see the handwriting on the wall. I know where we're headed, bankruptcy. So if you know you're in that kind of condition, what do? Well, you start to reduce your spending and your exposure. We're doing the opposite. All we're doing is exposing ourselves in the South Caribbean to all sorts of potentially bad outcomes.
Do you think there's any truth in the idea that there's this, I don't know what the exact title of the piece was, but the idea that U.S. military strategy going forward in the immediate to medium future is going to be focused on the Americas, new Monroe Doctrine, and I guess going even beyond that if we engage in war against Venezuela, Colombia, Cuba, so on and so forth. But when there's a lot of people who are bringing that up and saying, well, that means the U.S. is making a good decision to avoid future buildups against China. You talked a little bit about that with the Taiwan spending, and there's much more than that that's taken place over the past few years. But that was a big thing today. And also, we have all this talk again about the Europeans talking about buildup for 2030 against Russia, which I think is the fear that most people have, that they were just going to drag Trump along until it's time for him to go and start a new war, but a much bigger war against Russia. Do you see any truth that the U.S. is focused on the Americas, or do you think it's the same old game?
Jackson, the first thing people have to do is stop listening to what people say and look at what they do. Now, having talked privately years ago with President Trump, does he want to do those things? I'm sure he does. What's he doing? He's not doing those things. And if your goal is to drive China and Russia completely out of the Western Hemisphere in economic terms, using the military to beat down the Venezuelans is not a good idea. Because right now, if you're sitting in Colombia or Peru or Chile or Brazil or Argentina or Guyana, any of these places, and you see the Americans invading Venezuela, what are you going to do? Well, I don't want to do business with these people. I don't want them coming to my country to topple my government, to turn me into an economic protectorate of the United States. So it's the wrong answer. The other thing is we talked about the spending in Taiwan and the plans in South Korea. If he were serious about the things that he's saying, then you would not see these things happen. Somebody said, well, what do you expect him to do? Well, if he has to, he vetoes the bill. Mm-hmm. Well, that would make him very unpopular. At some point, that's what you have to do. If you're the president of the United States and you believe in what you just outlined, you take action. Now, what do you do about NATO? Back in January of 2022, I was interviewed by Dmitry Symes. He's in Moscow. You can see him if you want. Remind him if you see him. I'm sure he remembers.
Good man. And
he asked me point blank. He said, tell us about the future and what happens if the Russians intervene in Ukraine and NATO and so forth. And I said, so everybody else thought I was nuts, which is not unusual. But he said, what do you think happens? I said, NATO will not survive the crisis. It will collapse. It'll disintegrate. What do you think is happening right now? It's disintegrating. NATO is a group of cats, and herding them in any particular direction always required one thing: an unambiguous existential threat to Europe. Well, that went away in the 1990s. So NATO really didn't need to exist anymore. But people in Washington, again, remember I told you a lot of what happens in Washington is mortgaged to vanity. Well, we're the heads of NATO. The president is the most powerful man in the world. We're the great. Okay, fine, thanks. NATO is a joke. NATO is designed to defend. It was never designed to launch offensive operations. It has too many members. You're never going to get them to agree on anything. They all speak different languages. Yes, the senior leaders can all speak English. That's true. But you're not going to get an army in the field or an air force in the air or anything else that's going to flawlessly pull together and become effective. Mm-hmm. One of the best analogies that I can think of was something I read back in the mid 80s when I was given access to translated versions, very, very highly classified. They're not anymore, but they were then, of the Soviet General Staff Journal. And it was a marvelous article that I wish I could remember the gentleman that wrote it. It was a Russian Soviet general, I think. Could have been a colonel. And he talked about how the Soviets organized to fight the Second War and how the Anglo-American alliance organized to fight the war. And he one of the first things he said is that it was very difficult to understand why Eisenhower paid any attention to British demands. And the reason was, well, the Americans had 63 divisions in France by September. and the British had 19. And he compared it to the Soviet military machine, where they had Polish divisions, they had divisions that spoke different languages, but everybody was identically equipped. Everyone was integrated under the same unified military command structure. The language of command was Russian, and everybody moved immediately in one direction. And he said this Anglo-American alliance had no chance at all of ever winning any war, given the confused nature of the beast. In other words, again, we were herding cats. That thing is over. NATO is finished. It's over. The EU is crumbling because the EU was transformed into some sort of multinational, supranational entity that was going to dictate to everybody in Finland, Spain, Greece, and Bulgaria what clothes to buy, what time to get up in the morning, where to go to school, and so forth. Europeans don't want that. It was fine when it was limited to purely economic interests in terms of facilitating free trade across international borders. It moved well beyond it. That thing is done. Von der Leyen is finished. All these globalist elites in Europe are on the path to extinction. One of the smart things that President Putin has done is exercised patience. You know, there's an old Chinese saying, stand by the river long enough and eventually the bodies of your enemies will float by. It sounds harsh, but it's true. President Putin doesn't have to act dramatically or decisively at this point. If he waits a little longer, things will fall apart. And as they fall apart, you'll get new leaders. Nobody in Europe is interested in going to war with Russia. Nobody in the United States. I mean, go to Dallas, Texas, go to Seattle, Washington, and say, well, what do you think about this war in Eastern Ukraine? Do you think we should get into that? People say, Eastern what? Where? You know, and he said, yeah, we're going to send out what? You know, the Americans are completely disinterested. So this whole train of thought, this mentality, this psychology, it's all going to fall apart and go away. And the good news for us, thank God, is that Putin has exercised patience. Because you know, if you're in Moscow, you're encountering lots of people who are very angry about a lot of things and would probably act much more decisively and emotionally. Best thing about President Putin is that he holds his emotions in check. President Trump doesn't. He gets very emotional, and that gets him into trouble because it leads him to exaggerate and make inflated statements that are of no value for anybody. And that brings us back to Venezuela. You know, who in their right mind wants to send 100,000 or 200,000 American soldiers through triple canopy jungle in Venezuela? A friend of mine who is a former intelligence officer spent 9 years down there, and he was also in Vietnam. And he said, Doug, I was in Vietnam. This looks a lot like Vietnam. And I don't think we want to go in there.
It's Caracas itself. I mean, it takes like 40, 50 minutes to get there from the airport, and 90% of the time you're climbing up the mountainside. You know, it's
well, Jackson, there's one other thing I do want to say, and this is something that people need to understand. President Trump has been on the right track domestically. He wants to enforce federal law. We need to do that. The idea that you have a governor in Michigan, or Illinois, like Pritzker, who turns on the federal government and says, your ICE agents are terrorists. That's outrageous nonsense. That needs to be dealt with very severely. Have we closed the border? Well, we've secured it in most places, but we still have a huge problem at the legal crossing points because the cartels buy all the customs officers. That's one of the reasons that I've argued for years, send the army down there and then rotate units on and off the border. We did that in Germany. We've done it in Iraq. We've done it all the places we've ever been. We know how to do that. Why would you do that? Because you bring in a battalion, you leave it there for 45 days, you pull it out. It's not enough time to habitually buy up whomever is down there. Mm-hmm. And soldiers are better than that in most cases, based upon my experience. The officers are better than that. There are exceptions, but that's still there. The other thing is that we have to be prepared to go into these cities and enforce federal law. It's astonishing to me that the left wants to throw itself in front of the onrushing train to save Jose Garcia, whatever his name is, from being justifiably expelled. Well, he has children here with the woman. Well, then perhaps they need to leave. They don't understand that we're headed into tough times economically. We are providing free health care, free housing, free education, free whatever to millions of illegals. What are we doing for our own population? What do you do today if you live in Minnesota, Utah, Mississippi, and you need health care? You walk in and you see all these illegals that are receiving it all for nothing. You can't afford to pay for it. In some cases, you can't afford the insurance. We have to make some decisions. We have to decide in favor of our citizens. Now, I think President Trump has not explained that very well to the American people. I don't see the existence of a strategy to make all of this happen. And some of the people that he's got in his administration, frankly, are toxic. The environment in Washington, let's face it, is pretty toxic. But he's not wrong about those things. And I'm afraid that if we don't take those kinds of actions, the country will just fall apart. That's how bad it is right now. So we have two problems, and one, all this crap overseas. I hate to say the word crap, but it's truthfully the case. It doesn't matter. Yeah. What matters is what happens here inside the United States. This is where we must focus. And I wish that he would simply give a State of the Union address and say exactly that. And these are the measures that I am adopting, and I am disengaging our forces and so forth from overseas, from these various posts, both to save money and to refocus attention on what really counts here in the United States.
Yeah, I can't imagine that a war in Venezuela will aid and assist in the effort to discourage migrants into the U.S. So I think you're right. That would be a very appropriate start, and of course, continue the prosecution of unlawful activity in the U.S., whether it's on the civilian level or the state governor level or wherever it may be. But Colonel Macgregor, I think that's a wonderful place to leave off. Thank you so much for joining me today. Thanks for your time. Where is the best place for people to get involved at Our Country, Our Choice, and follow along with your work?
Well, Our Country, Our Choice, I have disengaged from that. I am now with a new organization that we founded last year called the National Conversation, which is straight up an attempt to build the foundation for a new political party. And everybody will tell you immediately, well, that's been tried before and that will never work. Well, normally they're right. But I think we're headed into a different environment now. More and more people are discovering that the differences between the Republicans and the Democrats are not that great. And that ultimately, thanks to a certain degree of gridlock in Washington, but also, I would say, mutual support for greedy endeavors, everybody tends to push in the same direction as long as they make money from it. That can't go on anymore. And so I think there's a time and an opportunity for a third way. The National Conversation is about that. And we had our first major meeting in Dallas last year on the 4th of October, or this year on the 4th of October. We're going to be traveling around the country, and people are going to be invited to come in. We'll have people that will speak, but we really want to interact with the audience. We want to hear what Americans have to say. You can't walk in, even if you're a billionaire like Elon Musk, and say, I want a new party, join me. You have to have support from the people, from the bottom. I think we can get that. There are a lot of Americans out there who are Americans first, not in theory, in practice. They are not captives of the Israel lobby or the pharmaceutical lobby or any other lobby in Washington. They're just Americans who want to see the country strong, independent, and effective, a government that works for them. So I think we have a chance to do that. And I think as things get worse, and I'm afraid at this point, for where I sit, I think they're going to get worse before they get better, that the national conversation will work. So it's nationalconversation.org. Go look it up. There's a website. You can see all the things that we've been doing there. You can post it if you can, Jackson, on your website. I
endorsed as many patriotic attempts to take back our country within the legal framework as possible. And like I said, I'll say it again, but I think that you need to be in these positions of power. I think people like Tucker need to be there. And I'm really appalled that Trump made so many of the picks that he did. And, some good picks that he made really fumbled the bag, as they say. They have not been the silent heroes, I think, that many of us even hoped for. But, I look forward to seeing everything that comes of it. And I will definitely link National Conversation in the description of this program for everyone to check out.
Okay. Well, thanks, Jackson, and stay out of trouble there. Those Russian women are very beautiful.
Yes, they are. Thank you so much.